Hello and welcome to the Rabblecast. My name is Erich Hernandez, along with...
Doug.
You sound so quiet when you say it. It just throws me off every time. And you are listening to episode number 632. On this episode, we talk about the trailer for The Iron Claw. It's a movie coming out on December 22nd. It's the story of the Von Erich family. And I'm going to say this much. If you're not familiar with the story of the Von Erichs, very famous wrestling family, if you don't want to be surprised when you watch the movie, look up their history and prepare yourself for the film. I'm sure the film is going to be fun. I'm sure it's going to be exciting. But I feel weird for people who are not fans of wrestling going into this and being shocked by the ending. I have not seen it. I only know the events that happened in history, so I can imagine what the movie is going to portray in the film itself. So we'll see what happens. But all that to be said is that trailer in of itself and the stories of the Von Erich family sparked a nice little trip down memory lane for Doug and I as we spoke about different matches, different points in time in wrestling history, and other stories we would love to see that would possibly be good on the big screen. I had mentioned the possible rise and fall of ECW. Actually, now that I think about it, even WCW would be fun too. But which one you had mentioned again?
The story of Sputnik Monroe.
Thank you. I was blanking on the last name. Both great stories. Very, very prominent points in wrestling history. So, again, wrestling is all about storytelling, entertainment, and getting those out there for the fans to enjoy, taking you on the journey. So making those into big film projects would be a lot of fun as well, but we'll wait and see. And then from there, we just go through different other points in wrestling history and different styles, different things. And it's fun. It's fun to talk about wrestling again. It also just reminds me that we're both getting old.
Yep.
Let's face it. It is what it is. We are brought to you by InsidePulse.com. You can find us under the games, comics, celebrities, movies. Head on over. The podcast link is still not working, but we're still posted there. I'll post a link up on the Facebook fan page where you can also find the show. You can also check out the show over on YouTube, youtube.com/Rabblecast or at Rabblecast. Rabblecast.libsyn.com is where the show lives and breathes always. Check us out on Twitter, at Rabblecast, and email us, rabblecast@gmail.com. Again, any stories, feedback, whatever you like to do, send it all over. We'd like to hear from you. We'd like to know that people are enjoying or not enjoying the show. We'll see what happens. That's about it. You have anything to add, sir?
Absolutely not.
Doug's along for the ride, everybody. Without further ado, let's get into it. Enjoy the show. Here we are once again, trying to get through this life. I don't know.
No, that was very poetic.
Oh man, it's so for anybody who doesn't know, Doug and I used to get together on what, Tuesday nights?
We bounced around. It was Tuesday nights, then it was Thursday nights, then it was Wednesday nights, and here we are again on Thursday nights.
So the Thursday night thing is kind of fun, only because I look forward to doing the show, look forward to talking to you. I know that when we're done, I just got to do a few things around the house, get ready for bed, and it's Friday.
Yep.
But for some reason this week, maybe again, leading up to the holiday, everything else, this week has felt long.
Mm-hmm.
Wednesday felt like Friday, which was really weird. And then today I got home and I was getting ready. I had dinner. Jen went out to martial arts with the kid. And I just felt weird. And I'm like, oh yeah, I got to record tonight. Weird. It's like everything's just like being thrown off little by little. So I'm just like, okay, let's just recenter, get what we need to get done, and just move along. So it's like, all right, we'll get there. Uh, Thankfully, getting set up tonight wasn't that big of a deal. People have heard about my trials and tribulations with the equipment recently. If it's not one thing, it's another. I solve one problem, another one pops up. I think I've eliminated one problem, another old one pops up. So it's like, okay, come on, work with me here, people. But finally, it looks like I've got things going okay. Hopefully, everything's fine, and we'll go through from there. So, how the hell are you, sir?
I'm tired and a little bit stressed out and having a rough week. So yeah,
Anything you
not
want
too
to
much better than you, I guess.
anything you want to expound upon, or
Um, Not particularly at the moment.
okay,
Yeah, just gonna look like I got some shakeups coming in my life. So I just don't know what's gonna happen and what direction I'm going in anytime soon. So I don't know. Time shall tell the tale.
fair enough. As always, if you want to talk about it, whether it's be on mic or off, you're more than
Hmm.
welcome to. With that, let's just jump into the first piece of, I guess you can say news or story or whatever you want to refer to it as. The first segment of the show, I guess. We really don't have segments. We just go bit by bit. Have you seen the trailer for the Iron Claw?
No,
No. Are you familiar with the Iron Claw?
I know what it is. I just haven't watched the trailer for it.
I watched part of it. I don't remember when it first debuted, and I was going to post it on Facebook. I don't think I ever got around to, so I got to remember to do it later on after the show. But it's the story of the Von Erich family,
Yes.
a very famous wrestling family. In fact, recently, The Rock was on Joe Rogan's podcast. So immediately I was like, oh shit, this should be an interesting story. He relayed a small part of his wrestling history when he was much younger. His father was down in Texas wrestling for one of the promotions for the Von Erich family. And he actually got to work out and hang out with the Von Erichs when he was a wee little lad.
Oh, wow.
So imagine Pebbles running around with the Von Erichs, having a lot of fun. And just, I can't even imagine. He said that Kerry Von Erich apparently was his hero. When you watch the trailer for the Iron Claw, just see the actors that they picked. Like it's kind of hard to really judge whether they're good picks, character wise or personality wise. But when you just see their physiques, you're like, Jesus, somebody's been hitting the pre-workout. Zac Efron. If anybody knows who Zac Efron is or was or what he's done, like, his Disney days and, his teen heartthrob phase, whatever the case is, you see him in the Iron Claw, you're like, Jesus, who the fuck is this guy? He is jacked. He is ripped. All of the Von Erichs just look like they can rip your head off, which is, part of the Iron Claw. But you get a sense of the trajectory of their superstardom when they became big, and it became a whole family thing. But then, the father was working them too hard, and then the tragedy that befalls all of them. And oh boy, like I have mixed feelings about the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And the only other time I had feelings like this was when I was about to watch The Wrestler with Mickey Rourke.
Okay.
Because, like there's the big upswing, like, yeah, he's, the hero's going to make it. But then, the downswing's coming, like, fuck, man, this is tragic. For anybody who doesn't know the unfortunate story of the Von Erichs, look it up, please. It's a cautionary tale, I guess you can say, in the world of professional wrestling.
It's what happens when you have too much success too quickly, I think.
Yeah. One of the things that I noticed was they don't mention the younger brother. I believe it was Chris Von Erich.
Yes, I believe he was the youngest one with the health issues.
Yeah. That was a whole story where apparently he was deemed not tall enough or not athletic enough to be part of the wrestling entourage. And that led to other stories down the line as well. But yeah, either it was accidents or suicide. It's a very heartbreaking tale for people who were so beloved in the world of professional wrestling to the point where, yeah, I'll watch it. I'm very intrigued by the whole story, and it's interesting now that we're now getting these stories from wrestling made into movies. Like you're makes you wonder what other wrestlers are going to get their time to shine, so to speak, on the big screen. Because recently, Vice TV has been doing Dark Side of the Ring and all the different stories from wrestling, and some are very well known, others not so much, and you get to hear some behind the scenes from some of the people that were involved, secondhand stories, whatever the case was. Look it up. Those will take away your evening very easily, and at the same time, you're like, Jesus, I didn't realize what the hell was going on behind the scenes in wrestling. It's always fun, and I can relate one story personally. It's never on the level of these guys, trust me. Mine was an independent wrestling story and nothing really to write home about. But I remember going to a show out in Metuchen. It was an outdoor show. They asked me to be the world wrestling famous clown, which I said sure. Put on the tights, put on the makeup, went out there, had some fun. But I took a leg drop and I didn't turn my head. So this guy, who was easily over 300 pounds, dropping his leg on my face, essentially clocked me right in the nose. I'm pretty sure, looking back on it, I probably had like a mild concussion from the whole thing.
Yeah.
But I remember like the excitement of the crowd because it was an outdoor show. You know, it was nice and breezy out, so it was nice and cool. Just having a blast. The match, unfortunately, because of my inexperience at the time, just didn't go as well as they had hoped. I remember the term drizzling shits being mentioned a few times.
Oh, the classic term.
Yeah, it did not turn out well. Probably because, I got my bell rung. But I remember coming off of the high of the crowd and then driving home, and I was trying to call random people in my my contacts just to talk to somebody, because I had felt something that I had never known before, and that was the downward spiral of coming off the high of the show and then falling into like this weird depression afterwards. And again, mine is a minor story, and thankfully nothing bad happened. I think I ended up getting somebody on the phone, and we spoke for a little bit while I drove home, and I was able to calm down and relax and get over, one, the match not going so great, and two, the fact that I was probably injured in some shape or form, but I just didn't know because I didn't know enough to get checked out. And again, indie show, you really don't have much medical staff on hand. It's just whatever's there and you move on. But I say this only to mention that the absolute high, the adrenaline rush that you would get when you're in front of a crowd and everybody's cheering and or booing, whatever the case is, you're getting those reactions. You're like, yeah, this is fucking amazing. I'm amped. And then when you're by yourself and it's silent and there's nobody to talk to, and it's this long drive home at night, I was like, man, this fucking sucks. But I can only imagine, again, mine is a minor story. I can only imagine some of these guys on the bigger scenes or territories, like the Von Erichs, having that fame, being pushed to a certain limit, being trained so hard to live up to this expectation from their father. I think the trailer mentions it, that their mother tried to keep them safe with religion. Their father told them that they would be invincible with wrestling, and they believed him. I was like, fuck. That just sets up a whole story that's ready to fall apart anytime. And just the quick shots of the trailer, seeing some of the different guys when they're training. Of course, there's the obligatory shots where they're pulling off their shirts, and you're just like, Jesus Christ, man, it looks interesting. It looks like it should be fun, but at the same time, I feel it's kind of like when you introduce a friend to a horror movie and they don't know it's a horror movie. And you're waiting for them to jump at those moments. I'm almost tempted to go with somebody who has no clue what wrestling is, as far as like the stories and the characters, and see what their reaction is going to be to the Von Erich story.
That made me think of something, a story I must impart upon you.
Go for it.
So my old friend Joe, who's a avid wrestling fan, and I don't think he'd ever call himself this, but I tend to think of him a bit as a wrestling historian because he could probably tell you what territories existed from the 1950s through 1990, who owned it, who was booking it, and who were the top stars at any point in time. Like he's an encyclopedia of wrestling knowledge. So I think it was about 8 or 9, maybe 10 years ago. There was a documentary that was made about the Von Erich family and the Von Erich curse. So he's sitting in his living room watching this. And of course, it's archival footage, some people who worked with the family, some of their famous opponents. And of course, they're talking to Kevin Von Erich, the sole surviving brother. And his wife, who's a wonderful woman, I've known her for years. She's super, super cool. She kind of comes wandering through, and she kind of starts watching it with her husband. And, and she just, after like 10 minutes or so, she just kind of looks at my buddy Joe and says, or her husband Joe, and says, when are they going to talk to the other brothers?
Hmm.
And my pal Joe, he just calmly pauses the documentary and then stops and then has to proceed to explain to his wife that they can't talk to the other brothers because they're all dead. And yeah, at that point, I think he was just like, you know what? I think I'll finish this documentary another time. As his wife just kind of sat there with like a look on her face, like, as just completely deflated by something so fucking bleak.
Yeah, that's what I would expect from somebody who has no clue what they're getting into to watch this movie. So yeah, I just don't know. Again, because you and I are wrestling fans, we know the story, we know the history. And the Von Erich family being what they were to wrestling, like they were so big, especially in their hometown. It's just an interesting thing now, and it makes me wonder. Like I said before, who else is going to get their story told? Because I know that there was supposedly a Hulk Hogan movie being made with Chris Hemsworth portraying Hulk Hogan. I don't know exactly how that works out. I don't know. We'll see, because there's a bunch of other stories that could be told, but they all kind of intertwine at some point or another. I was looking through the credits earlier, and they got somebody who's going to play Ric Flair.
Yeah.
Apparently MJF has a credit on the casting list. I don't know where he falls in the whole thing. But we'll have to wait and see, I guess, when it comes out. And it's not too far away. December 22nd.
Really?
Yeah, I think this is an A42 movie.
Oh, okay, got it. All right.
So, I mean, they got my attention, I'll say that much, because when I first heard about it, what's his name? Jeremy Allen White. For anybody who watches, I believe it's called The Bear. I can't remember what streaming service it's on, but it's a drama around like the culinary scene or like a kitchen, whatever they work in particular. But this guy, like when you see him in the trailer, he's just jacked. And then when you see Zac Efron, he's just bulky. Like, I don't know how he walks. He's so top heavy. It looks odd compared to his High School Musical days. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out and what kind of reception it gets. Apparently, the day after the actor strike finished up, they did the premiere in Texas, and people were enjoying it. So, but they know their audience, especially. I mean, if you're going to be opening out in Texas, let's face it, they're going to get the crowds. They're going to invite the people out. I'm sure the wrestling scene is enjoying it very much. I believe I saw pictures of Trish Stratus on the red carpet. So it's very much anticipated for the wrestling world at this point to see what happens from there. Because I would imagine from there that launches other projects, other stories will probably be told. Who knows which other one? I mean, maybe they can just cherry pick the ones from Vice TV. Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
Any stories in particular that you would like to see on the big screen after the Von Erichs?
In relation to wrestling?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's enough to do a movie about it, but I'd love to see. I'd love to get more information on the what the hell is it called? On the story of Sputnik Monroe.
Why am I blanking on this one?
What's that?
I'm blanking on that one. What's this about?
So Sputnik Monroe, he was a wrestler back in the bloody hell. I want to say like 50s, maybe even 60s. His claim to fame is he helped integrate Memphis wrestling.
Hmm.
So effectively, what happened is, let me just go to the article. Hold on.
Sure thing.
So he was started wrestling. He was initially like an evil heel gimmick using the Sputnik name after the Russian satellite. Um, what happened was when he ended up working in Memphis, segregation was still normal at the time. And the way they had it set up is when you went wrestled at whatever venue they were using for a lot of Memphis wrestling at the time, whites would sit on the floor and people of color would sit in the balcony, which I'm assuming was relegated to blacks and any Latino folks who were going to watch the wrestling. So what he did is Monroe is he would dress up in his most like ridiculous outfits, like gowns and capes and stuff like that, and like ridiculous looking hats and walking sticks and stuff like that. And he would go to the black part of town and go to the black bars and go hang out there and drink and hand out tickets to the wrestling shows and basically run around doing shtick and just, kind of like, hey, everybody, what's going on? And, just kind of like playing up everything with them. And so what happened is it got to the point where, first off, the cops would arrest him periodically because, they were like, why is a white guy drinking in a black bar? That was kind of frowned upon at the time. So he would basically get arrested. He would pay the fine and then immediately go back and be like, fuck you, I'll drink wherever the hell I want. Fuck you. So what would happen is he ended up getting so much notoriety and popularity that when some of the black fans would show up to go see Monroe wrestle, he'd show up and the balcony would be completely overfilled to the point where they had to turn away people of color from it. But the floor would be virtually empty. So finally, the promoters were like, well, we're not going to give away money. And they're like, well, fuck it. Just let everybody sit together.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot more to the story. But yeah, that was one of the things I've always wanted to. It's such a fascinating and odd story in terms of wrestling history. Yeah, I'd like to see like some more information fleshed out about that entire thing and like, get like the whole backstory on the entire affair. So. And it's an interesting bit of history in relation to the whole thing.
Yeah.
And also a fun fact, Sputnik Monroe in 1965, he wrestled a kid who was having his very first wrestling match who was brought into the business by his father and older brother. And that man was Terry Funk.
Ooh. Okay.
Yeah, Sputnik Monroe was Terry Funk's very first wrestling opponent when he broke into the biz when he was about 20 years old.
No shit. Look at that.
Yep. So Sputnik Monroe occupies a lot of interesting footnotes in the history of professional wrestling. But he's one of those guys because he retired back in, I think it was like the late 70s he retired. So, I mean, like, that was still the territory era. So he was pretty much lost to time unless you're like a historian who's actually tracking this information down.
I wonder what it would take for Sputnik to be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame.
He actually is.
Is he?
Yeah, he was. You know how they always do every year? They always do those group like legacy inductees.
Did I miss it? I have no recollection of this.
It was a couple of years back, I think pre-pandemic. Okay, here it is. WWE Hall of Fame class of 2018.
No
Because
shit.
in addition to like the main inductees, so for example, 2018 they inducted Goldberg, they inducted Ivory, they inducted Hillbilly Jim in the famous speech that went like forever. It was one of those speeches that's like people still make jokes about how Hillbilly Jim just kept on going on and on and on about everything. Mark Henry was also inducted. The Dudley Boys. Kid Rock was the celebrity induction that year. And yeah, they always do like the quote unquote the legacy inductees.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he was one of those guys. So yeah, that year the legacy inductees were Boris Malenko, who was Dean Malenko's father.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Cora Combs, who was a NWA Women's Wrestling Champion, Dara Singh, who was a Canadian pro wrestler, El Santo, um, Hiro Matsuda went in that year, who he's more famous for who he trained as opposed to what he did in the ring. Um, because he was the guy who got sent a lot of guys to polish him up, including Hulk Hogan and Lex Luger.
Mm-hmm.
Jim Londos went in that year. Rufus R. Jones, one of the first black heavyweight champions. Sputnik Monroe, Stan Stasiak, who was Sean Stasiak's father, and Lord Alfred Hayes.
Some of those I remember. I don't remember Sputnik being put in. Wow. Okay. Shit.
Because also, like, how, but did you, like, I only know of Sputnik Monroe because I read an article about him, like, probably like 8 or 9 years ago. And then I remember Colt Cabana did a podcast about him when he was doing, he had a different podcast. It was basically about, like, kind of like the weird, it was not Art of Wrestling. It was like, he would just, like, cover, like, oddball wrestling subjects. And yeah, and he did an episode of Sputnik Monroe, basically helping to integrate Memphis wrestling. So
Okay. Fuck.
Mhm.
That's a great pick. If that's the case, like I said, I'm
Yeah,
completely blanking on him as far as as far as the induction, and completely blanking on his background. Thank you for reminding me. Shit.
no problem. It's one of those little interesting. Wrestling is a fucking cool thing, and I'm definitely not the same fucking wrestling fan I used to be. But it's the interesting ones like that hold my hold my attention, like the weird little bits of those weird historical footnotes that are just like the oddest things, like a story like that. Like, I never would have, if somebody told me that happened, I'd be like, that doesn't even make any sense. What the fuck are you talking about? But there it is right there, man. Yeah, pretty cool.
Yeah, the fun part is when you get to look back on now, especially because wrestling historians, so quote unquote, are becoming more prominent because they're telling the stories behind the scenes. Whether it's the wrestlers themselves are now, relaying their own stories, their own anecdotes, or people around the scenes, or in the locker room or in the front office. They're sharing a lot of these stories that before it was taboo to say anything. So now we're finding out more and more about what happened. I mentioned before, The Rock said he was fortunate enough to hang out with the Von Erichs as a little kid. He had also mentioned that his father, Rocky Johnson, had a chance to spar with Muhammad Ali at one point. And of course, I give him a lot of credit because he was talking about, how he broke into the business. He was trying to get into football at the time. It didn't really work out, especially he played a season for Canadian football. Really wasn't going so well. When that wasn't going so well, he decided he wanted to break into the business. And just about everybody he told, including his father, were like, why would you want to do that? Pretty much saying, like, look, I did wrestling. It didn't give me shit. Like, I have this apartment that I can barely pay for. What do you have to give to the business? Not knowing who he's going to become. But everybody pretty much told him, like, you don't want to do this. It's not a smart move. Stick to football. Find something else. Whatever the case is, wrestling is not the way to go about it all. But he decided to go for it. And he mentions in his little story that he's telling that, his first match, when they brought him down to, I don't know if it was a dark match or if it was a television taping, but he wrestled the Brooklyn Brawler. I was like, yay, the Brooklyn Brawler making an appearance in wrestling history once again. But the fact that that revolving cast of characters, especially from, the early years, it's interesting to see who was around when. You mentioned Sputnik. I would actually kind of like to see based on a true story, kind of retelling of the rise and fall of ECW. I know we have a WWE made documentary and we have the unofficial documentary and all that kind of stuff, but I would like to see the Hollywood version of that, because I can just imagine how crazy it would be to see that cast of characters, those misfits that came together and put this weird show together that just was no rules, no holds barred. Everything just went crazy. And to hear, a Paul Heyman personality just trying to wrangle everything, that would be something that I would love to see. I think it would appeal to a larger audience. especially like the Von Erichs is such a zeroed in story, but ECW that
Hmm.
was such a wide phenomenon for the world of wrestling. So yeah, it would be really cool to see all that come about. I mentioned again the Vice TV Dark Side of the Ring because I've only caught a few here and there, but I think the
Yeah.
first time I ever watched one of those, I was going through a bout of unemployment. I was at home by myself, and I think, was just like searching online for random stuff to watch, and I came across the Chris Benoit story,
Oh boy.
and yeah, that was a two-parter. I knew a lot of the details previous because we lived through that tragedy, unfortunately. Hearing the story and him missing the pay-per-view the following Monday night and everything that happened, but then hearing the more personal details from everybody who was involved, Chavo Guerrero, um, Nancy's family, it just like all the people that were surrounding this story. It just caught my attention. I can't remember how long the two parts were, but I was just sucked in, going like, "What happened next?" Just that morbid curiosity that gets the better of us all in situations like that. And I was just trying to figure out more and more and more, kind of like playing wrestling detective, I guess you can say, in your head, because you're trying to piece it
Yeah.
all together as they're telling you the story and how it all happened and everything else like that. And just along those lines, I mean, they call it the Dark Side of the Ring for a reason. Some stories might be fun, depending on how it's told, but a lot of the stories are just like some of the more hush hush tales that you don't hear much about, talked about, either on TV or in interviews or anything else like that. Podcasts have given us more insight to stuff like that, especially when they do the shoot interviews. Sometimes you hear some of the weird stories come out. But yeah, some of the stuff, I don't know. You just have to you have to be ready to hear some of the stories because sometimes some of the guys that you thought were like heroes and stand up guys, once they get behind the curtain, some of the other stuff that goes on, you're like, oh Jesus, what kind of fucking freak were you?
Well, here's the way I look at it. Like I look at you kind of have to so and this has always been a challenging thing. You have to figure out if how much you're comfortable separating the art from the artist.
Yes.
Um, there's a lot of wrestling I can watch and it'd be like, yeah, that person's a hell of a performer. I know there's a scumbag outside of the ring, but I'm cool watching this match. I'll be honest, like Ben was a tough one for me. Like I can probably rattle off five absolutely amazing Chris Benoit matches without even trying,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't have an easy time watching his stuff anymore just because here we are 16 years after the fact, and the specter of what he did still hangs over it and probably will for the rest of time.
Yeah.
Um, and it's there's no way around stuff like that. And I mean, everybody's mileage is a little bit different with this kind of thing. And there's some other wrestlers, and Benoit's the extreme case. I mean, there's plenty. I mean, like Hulk Hogan's a piece of shit. Let's face facts. There's really no way around it. The guy's a fucking scumbag. I mean, between the fact that he's a fucking, he was a coked up, roided up prick. He was fucking, if Jesse Ventura's to be believed, then Jesse Ventura's a little crazy. He basically did himself a bunch of favors by fucking over everybody else who were actually looking to start in the union. He's a notorious liar. In fact, if anybody wants a good time, there's a podcast out there called Final Wrestling Place. It's two fellas, Tim and Marcus, and what they did a few months back is they actually went over and they did a podcast on the top 10 lies of Hulk Hogan.
I think you've mentioned this
And
one before.
I love it because it's so fucking funny hearing them because they're just cracking up. I mean, like, especially like one of the all-time classics I always think of is, of course, the famous, at the day when WrestleMania 3 happened, Andre weighed over 700 pounds. When Hogan body slammed him, he tore every muscle in his back, and Andre died the next day. I mean, like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Or about how Metallica basically asked him to be their new bass player after Cliff Burton died, but he's like, no, I gotta go wrestle. Yeah, it's crazy shit. But anyway, But getting back to the point, I mean, and the thing is, and that's the case, like, no matter who you look at, everybody did some dicey shit in the world of fucking wrestling. It is what the fuck it is. But, I mean, God, I mean, like, I listen to a lot of punk rock, and Jesus fucking Christ, if you're in a punk band between, like, 1978 and 1990, you're probably a multiple time felon, and you just, whether or not you got arrested for it. So yeah, it's just one of those fucked up ass things where you just think about it and be like, God damn, how far, what exactly are you comfortable with? And everybody's got to figure that out for themselves, I think. So
I remember very vividly the reaction to what happened with Chris Benoit and his family, and a lot of people just pretty much swore him off. Like, oh, he should be erased from wrestling history, and I can't believe that, and that's horrible. I can't watch it anymore. I'm like you said, separating the two, it's a very, very fine line you have to walk with that one, because you don't want to idolize the guy, because obviously he did something that was not good whatsoever. Like, obviously the man was sick. Obviously the man was in trouble, and he just pulled off some heinous shit. I still enjoy Chris Benoit for everything that he did for the business of wrestling. The limits that he pushed, the extremes that he did. Obviously he punished himself, and we know what those effects were. But the body of work that he built, both here, overseas, anywhere he went, he was just always a workhorse. And it was amazing what he was able to do. But I'm with you on the same thing, where, especially if I watch him do the flying headbutt or the rolling suplexes, like, every time I see his head connect with the mat, or I see a chair swung at his head, all those, like, oh man, like, you can track it, you can see the progression of this, and that's sickening, that's horrible, knowing where it's going. And then you get to the other behind the scenes stories, especially when he was in WCW, some of the other stuff. Like, he was obviously off his rocker, and it's unfortunate what happened, but I can still appreciate the man for the technician that he was.
Oh yeah, if you're just doing it strictly on wrestling talent, I mean, God, you're talking about a guy who's like an all-timer, maybe top 10.
Yeah.
I mean, like, God, like I said, like, I can rattle off 5 amazing matches without even trying for him. But you just, and I also think of, he was that part of that crop of guys who helped kind of break that line between, well, you have to be a fucking monster, and he was like 5'8", 5'9", I think, something like that. But
yeah,
he was so talented, and he had offense that would make sense against somebody his size, or offense against somebody who was 6'8" and 300 pounds. And it was guys like him and Chris Jericho and Dean Malenko and Rey Mysterio and Eddie Guerrero, of course, who they helped kind of like knock it down, and they helped bring about that entire era where, let's be honest here, once upon a time, like, guys like that were never ever going to get into the main event.
The term,
and, they kind of
vanilla midgets pops up again.
Exactly. And I mean, you think about it, I mean, even back in the 90s, Bret Hart's not the biggest guy in the world. Shawn Michaels definitely is not. I think Shawn Michaels was like 5'9" and 205 pounds. And they were kind of like the first guys to really they crawled so guys like Benoit, Jericho, and Guerrero could walk, in my opinion. And then, that kind of helped get us to where we are today, where, in the wrestling business, a lot of and you can have like different flavors out there. You can have the guys who are giants, and that's fine. You want to have your big meaty men slapping meat match, that's cool. But, chocolate and vanilla, as the old saying goes, you can have those guys, and you can also have 2 guys who are smaller who are going to put on a technical clinic. And then you can have 2 guys come out there and, do, a ton of lucha shit. And then you can have, whatever the fuck you want. I mean, that's the beauty in the entire thing. It's funny to think, but like back in like the late 80s into the 90s, especially in WWF, like, it was the land of the giants, man. Like, even the guys you think of as like being like average, like Honky Tonk Man's fucking huge. I just always go with him because I saw him at an indie show back in like 2009, and the first thing I said to myself, I was like, "Holy shit, he is tall."
That's
'Cause
a
he's
lot
got to
of
be
honky
like six
tonk.
foot. Yeah, Honky Tonk Man's like a good 6'3". So I was like, "Well, son of a bitch." But back in those days, like Jake the Snake's the same thing. Jake's like a legit 6'4", 6'5", I think.
Well, the
It's tough to think
problem
about, but even like, huh?
the problem with it is when you see them on TV and they're all 6 foot something,
Yeah,
you could easily say, "Oh yeah, that guy's like 5'8", because there's no comparison. There's no, like, if you put and I watched this recently. WWE has now started to do like compilation videos on YouTube.
yeah,
And they put up, like, I think it was like 2 hours or 3 hours of Undertaker matches, like top 10 or like some of the top Undertaker matches.
yeah.
And you really don't appreciate the size of the Undertaker until he steps into
Hmm.
the ring with a guy like Rey Mysterio. And you're like, Jesus.
Yeah.
there's
Oh, yeah, exactly.
there's just something's not right here. But what I love about this compilation was that they were able to pick a bunch of different matches, and you essentially get to see Taker in different phases of his career, so different phases of the character itself. But also you can see how his repertoire changed as he wrestled all the different people throughout his career. Wrestling with Ray, it was a classic, big man versus little guy, and just the way they pulled it off, it made Ray look believable, like he could actually possibly beat the Undertaker the way the match was booked. You're like, this, he has a shot. When he fights Kane, like, obviously it's just two big guys slugging it out. When he fought Shawn Michaels, when he fought Triple H, when he fought John Cena. I watched a few of the matches over the weekend here and there, and just enjoying some of the nostalgia. But it just shows, yeah, like you said, some of these people, when you see them in real life, you don't realize how big they are until you catch a glimpse. You're like, holy shit, like Undertaker he's larger than life. There's a reason why they call him the Phenom. But
Well, here's one of the great examples I still think back to, even though it was 9 or 10 years ago. Of course, I'm going to assume you remember back at New York Comic Con when you got to interview Mick Foley.
yes,
I remember when he stood up and started walking across the room. I just remember even like stopping and looking at him, being like, "Damn, he's a big fucking guy."
yeah, he is.
And I never really thought of him as a giant guy, but he's like probably like he's over 6 foot, and he was definitely for most of his career he was up pushing 300 pounds. So, but yeah, even like with like a lot of like the back issues and knee issues and hip issues and everything else he's got now, which is kind of making him walk a little hunched over. I remember still just looking at him, just kind of being taken aback for a moment, be like, "Damn!" And I even thought back to like the 1990s. I was like, "Yeah, he didn't really look like that much like smaller than the Undertaker. Like he kind of looked like he was real like on par with him." So I was like, "All right, this all kind of makes sense."
Yeah, and that's, again, when you bring in smaller guys, and your regular roster finally looks like actual giants. I know we talk about other people like Giant Gonzalez or the Big Show. I mean, obviously they're pushing 7 feet, but another guy like Braun Strowman, their size, it really gets to be on display when you show a smaller guy. That's one of the things I loved about whenever they did the interview segments with Mean Gene Okerlund.
Hmm.
Mean Gene, little guy, hair in the sides, no hair up top, bald head, mustache. Your typical announcer for that time period. But when the Undertaker would walk backstage and Paul Bearer would start, whatever promo they were doing, or if it was Brother Love, whatever the case was, and the Undertaker just stood there menacing the camera. It's just like, man, that guy's huge.
Yep.
That showed, because otherwise, if you don't have the if you don't have the smaller guy there to show the comparison, the difference in size, you forget sometimes that these guys are a certain size. Likewise, one of the things that always gets to me, not so much the wrestlers, but being that I've been in wrestling rings in different companies, the size of the wrestling ring is another thing that always gets is off-putting to me sometimes. And you really don't get to see it too much in WWE when they do their shots, because whenever they do their camera shots, one of the ring sides is usually cut off. So I don't remember what the official size, if it's 10 by 10 or 12 by 12, but you have a lot more running room in a WWE ring. An indie size ring is like usually about 8x8, I believe. So if you get one of these WWE guys to do a wrestling match, it's kind of funny because they pretty much fill the ring. It doesn't leave much room for anything else. In fact, I remember the one time Rikishi did a show with us in South Jersey. And yeah, watching Rikishi get into the ring, I honestly thought the ring was going to break. Not because of Rikishi's size so much, but I knew what the indie ring was like because we built it pre-show. The beams, the boards, the mats, the canvas. I knew how the structure of it. And when Rikishi would do his moves in the ring, I was like, oh my God, that thing's going to fucking snap in half. But that's another thing. Like, you don't really appreciate the size and scope of some of these guys sometimes. But when you have those on display, and again, I go back to the whole Ray and Undertaker thing, or even Ray and Undertaker and Shawn Michaels, just to see the size difference and how it all plays out. But the fact that they can still work together and make it a cohesive match and tell that story, that's the fun part. That's the part that gets you excited. That's like, yeah, let's do this some more. Side note, as I was watching the compilation of Undertaker matches, the first time I saw somebody swing a chair, or actually I think it was the Triple H match, so it was either a chair or a sledgehammer. WWE has done this annoying thing. You're watching the video, and as they go to swing the weapon or the implement to their opponent's head, they do a stutter step in the video. And at first you're thinking to yourself, oh, my connection might have like slowed down, or the video probably buffered or something. So I rewinded real quick, so I just wanted to see the impact, see how silly it looked. Because, Triple H, whenever he swung the sledgehammer, he'd put his hand on the head of the sledgehammer. So usually it was his hand connecting with the opponent. So I'm watching the match, I rewind it, or, skip backwards and go again. Same thing. WWE has stutter stepped all of their impacts to the head. So whenever you see somebody use a chair or a sledgehammer or foreign object, whatever the case is, they don't show the shot. They do like a weird like pause, and then they jump ahead past the impact. And I noticed it in the second match I watched as well. I believe it was the Shawn Michaels match, where when they go to show the replay, even the replay, the picture-in-picture thing?
Yeah.
Even the replay has the same stutter step. So which I'm like, have you guys really fucking just like gone that far? You're censoring your own history now? Like, I understand CTE is more prominent now. It's more widely discussed. But hell, again, Chris Benoit, we've opened the discussion wide as far as the effects of head trauma in sports. But it's a little frustrating when they decide that, we're going to omit this part. We don't want to show those impacts because obviously, audiences are very, what's the word I'm looking for? Kids can be very, I'm blanking on the fucking word. But it's okay when they were doing their whole, kids don't try this at home. Impressionable. That's what I'm thinking about. If you see it on TV and suddenly, when you're out in the backyard or you're roughhousing in the living room, whatever the case is, somebody grabs an implement and swings and, shot to the head. The other thing was during the Rey Mysterio match, Taker takes a shot to the nose and starts bleeding. And you see the initial trickle as it starts to come out, but then once it starts to come out more and more, the scene changes. So you're watching a regular wrestling match, then all of a sudden it goes to black and white. So they don't show the blood.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that. But
yeah,
it is what it is.
And I'm just like, come on, man, just show me the pure match, the uncut match. I just want to see that. But I get it now. Publicly traded company. Actually, yeah, they still are after the sale. But all that going on now, and they have a room of shareholders, and everybody wants to try to reach the widest audience possible. Blah 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 blah. I get it, but it's just frustrating. So much so that when Undertaker now comes down, especially during his old days of Biker Taker, they no longer have the rights to Limp Bizkit music. So insert generic rock music here.
Yeah, I know. I remember that. Yeah, they did that with Roland. I think they also did that with the Kid Rock song as well.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah. So It's amusing in hindsight, but at the same time, you're like, come on. Like ECW. Anytime you watch old ECW videos now, especially if they're rebranded with the WWE version of ECW, they don't even attempt to show the old intros as far as they're in their original forms. They always put generic music in there. It's like, come on, man. That's part of the fun of it. It was so outlaw and rebellious. They're like, yeah, we're just going to play whatever we want and just put it out there. Because back in the day, who thought about music rights?
Well, I'll do you one even better that I find even more bizarre and more of an attempt at them to rewrite history. If you go back and watch old WCW pay-per-views for Chris Jericho,
Yep.
they used his WWE theme instead of his WCW theme music.
Oh, that's weird. Really?
Yeah, I was listening to, I forgot, I was watching, oh bloody hell, I want to say it was Halloween Havoc 97, I think it was. I can't remember what it was. It was a pay-per-view that Jericho was on. And he comes out, and I'm sitting there listening, and I'm like, that's Break the Walls Down. That didn't exist for 2 years later. Like, what the fuck are you doing? And I looked it up somewhere, and it's like, yeah, they decided to overdub like a bunch of people's. And it's even weirder because they own the rights to the WCW music. They just decided, it's like, no, we want this. We want everyone to associate them with the WWE theme music and not the ECW or WCW version. So it's very silly.
Scrub that part out. Oh, man. See, that's a little frustrating.
That just sounds to me like, I don't know, Vince McMahon being a crazy fucking person. So who the hell knows?
It's entirely possible. I can only imagine the board meetings where they go through and like, all right, this song pops up in this part. This wrestler uses this music. And like, all right, just put in generic music. It's weird. It's a really weird choice.
I understand, for the stuff they'd have to pay rights for, that I get. But, for stuff they already own the rights to, and they just, no, we're using our theme music, not WCW's music. That's just dumb.
Jen made a very good point last night because I was watching one of the matches again and we were talking about it a little bit. At a certain point, do you think they could actually sidestep the music rights and put it? I know wrestling's not real. It's all choreographed and orchestrated or, written out beforehand. But at a certain point in time, do you think we can get to a point where it's more of like a historical record and they can just sidestep the music rights? Like, look, this happened in history. This is a historical moment in professional wrestling. We're trying to present it as pure as possible. That includes having the music that was played when he came out.
I don't think that's ever going to happen because I don't think you can claim. No, okay, if you were just literally trying to make a documentary or something like that and you're going to reference, yes, this is the song by this band that they were using, that's fine. But knowing that for every other application of that, it's something where they're trying to make money. Yeah, they're not going to. Yeah, I don't see any artist signing off on that. And no matter how many times you try to claim fair use, I believe. Yeah. And I'm far from an expert on these matters. But
You're not? Shit.
Surprisingly enough. Yeah.
You just dashed my hopes and dreams right there. Again, it's just you want to listen to some of the older music because I think who was he wrestling? He was wrestling Stone Cold Steve Austin. It was one of the In Your House pay-per-views, and the Hart Foundation comes down. And when the Hart Foundation came down, I don't know what music they were playing. I couldn't even recognize it, to be honest. But it was just like one of those weird things. You're like, oh, this is so weird. And then the match plays out as per usual, whatever the case is. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but between like the rewriting of history, the censoring of the history, it's like the famous one that I usually jump to in my mind, only because it was such a shock moment, it was the Mickie James Trish Stratus at WrestleMania. I believe it was WrestleMania 30.
Okay.
They were doing the stalker angle for Mickie James where she was going after Trish. And then when they were in the ring battling it out, Trish ends up putting her hands or her one hand between Trish's legs. And then when she brings it out, she ends up licking her hand and looking at the camera. And I was like, oh my God. But if you watch it, any replay or any retelling of that match, that spot is usually cut out.
I remember reading that they cut that out because otherwise it might jeopardize their when they were getting away from, if that happened in the Attitude Era, that would be like completely famous. But yeah, that's definitely one of those ones when they were trying to get a little more towards PG that they got to cut that one out. So I get that.
Now, I heard stories that they're apparently like letting some more things go. Is that true or no?
I don't know. I couldn't tell you. I could not tell. I'm trying to think dude, I haven't watched a WWE event or show since the Royal Rumble back in January. I I didn't even watch any. I didn't even watch any of WrestleMania this year.
I'm trying to think if I
But
did. No, no, I did. I watched a couple of matches. No, I watched both nights actually. I can't even remember what I
okay,
watched.
there you go.
It's so confounding at this point. No, yeah, it's. I don't watch on a regular basis anymore, especially because it's funny. It's easier to watch now because now I
Hmm.
think Peacock has the streaming rights, so you can watch a bunch of like little compilations, documentaries. They have the shows on there as well, and the pay per views. Saturday nights now they have a pay per view. I'm like, oh shit, that's like what I wanted when I was a kid. Because Sunday night sucked. You watch Sunday night, and then you have to get ready for school the next day.
Yeah.
Now you can watch it Saturday night, enjoy your Sunday, no problem. But I'm like, I've got so many other things going on that I just don't have the time to dedicate to watching that. I'll catch a replay, or I'll catch like a quick segment online of something that Rhea Ripley did, or something that Rey Mysterio did, or The Rock's brief return on SmackDown, whatever the case was. Little things that make headlines, and then you're like, oh, let's check this out. But otherwise, I just have not been able to dedicate that much time to it, unless it's a Botchamania, and then I can just put it on in the background and enjoy the silliness.
Well, that's different.
So,
You know,
but
and part of it is a lot of the stuff they do nowadays. It's it's not geared to the kind of wrestling fan I am.
no, absolutely not.
No, their stuff, they're very specific in what they do. They've trained their crowds very well to be into the kind of wrestling that they want to put out there. Um, and that's fine. If somebody's into that, hey, if you like it, enjoy it, watch it, have a good time, party up. Me, if I'm gonna watch anything, like I'd rather watch, an old crazy ass brawl from like, one of the from like I don't know, Mid South Wrestling or NWA or something like that. Or I'm gonna watch like some clips of some Japanese stuff like from like back in like the '90s when you had Stan Hansen like killing people with the lariat, or Misawa and Kawada kicking the hell out of each other. I've kind of just fallen like a lot of modern wrestling. I've just kind of just I don't know, it doesn't really click for me. So I watch some AEW stuff here and there, and that's pretty much the grand total of the entire thing. So
I know I came across it recently. Did I send it to you? It was on Instagram. Somebody posted up clips of the Steiner brothers versus the Great Muta and Sting. Did I send it to you?
I don't know. Honestly, I'm barely on Instagram anymore because there's so many fucking ads. So
Okay, fair enough.
yeah, I took it off my phone in irritation because I kept getting ad after ad for like these weird, like crazy ass, like right wing Christian fucking groups.
What the fuck?
Yeah, I was like, who did I piss off to get these shitty fucking ads? Like, it's not even interesting. It's just like, I would literally go in there and just like type something like, go fuck yourselves, or like, fuck your piece of shit organization. So after a while, I just got so irritated with it. I was like, you know what? Fuck Instagram. So yeah, I'm barely on there anymore. So you may have sent it to me, but I think I know the match you're speaking of because I believe there's a spot in it where Rick Steiner's in the corner. Muta does the handspring elbow at him, but Steiner takes a few steps forward and like catches him in midair, flips him around, and like throws him with like a fucking German suplex.
Yes.
Yeah,
It,
that is some wild shit.
it was classic Steiner brothers from back then. And just to see both, Rick and Scott, like, I don't want to say they're prime because, I mean, they still had more to give after that. But especially over in Japan, it just felt like it hit harder. Like, even there was a Hulk Hogan match from Japan. I can't remember who he was going against. But, like, Hogan was actually doing moves. Like,
Yeah, I've seen that. Like it's like an arm bar, and I was like, what the fuck? Yeah, yeah.
yeah, he was actually forced to work. Like he needed to, impress the crowd. And over there, they wanted to see you work, and they didn't want to see, the five moves of doom. They expected you to, put your best out there. And whenever you watch some of these Japanese matches, you're like, man, like I didn't know why don't they do that over here? That's because if they do that over here 5 nights out of the week, they'll end up injured and sidelined. That's not something they can
Well, and they
keep up.
know they can get away with like filling up more Gaga into the match, especially for a guy like Hogan, where he's the attraction. Like his in-ring work and his in-ring technical ability is not the selling point for him. So I don't blame him. I do appreciate the fact that, like, especially in the 90s, a lot of like American teams would go over there and be like, okay, we can really take the gloves off now. Yeah, like Steiner's, like their stuff over there was nuts. Oh, bloody hell, I'm trying to remember the team. It was Scott Norton and was it Bam Bam Bigelow? Yeah, I think it was Bam Bam Bigelow. They would do some tag runs together over there, and it was just wild. Like they were just kicking the hell out of people. The same thing with Dr. Death, Steve Williams, and Terry Gordy, or Bruiser Brody and Stan Hansen's the classic example. Where these guys were like, they were intense in the United States, but when they go over there to Japan, where it's like, oh, you want to throw a couple of potatoes and work snug, go for it. Yeah, I was gonna say, look the fuck out, or like, I mean, Jesus Christ, every time the Road Warriors went to fucking Japan and just beat the shit out of people, and the Japanese wrestlers were like, yeah, that's cool. Yeah, hit me in the face as hard as you can, and I'll just hit you back as hard as I can too, and we'll just go with it. But,
Yeah, and then the crowd would be silent for most of the part, and then when they saw something impressive, they just clap. It's like, ooh,
yeah, which I always
respectful.
kind of always appreciated that. Speaking of which, going back to our previous subject of what would make a cool movie related to wrestling, how cool would it be to have like a film dramatization or something of that nature regarding like some of the more over the top like Japanese deathmatch stuff?
I'm down
Think
for that.
about Yeah, I mean, think about like the IWA King of the Deathmatch tournament from '95 when Foley beat Funk in the finals with the exploding barbed wire board deal, or some of the other stuff on that entire show of like, Shoji Nakamaki and Foley like slamming each other into barbed wire boards or like the thumbtack pits or any of the other crazy ass shit those guys would do. I mean, that stuff would make a fascinating documentary. Or even just the simple fact of the matter of like how the Yakuza has always been involved in combat sports in Japan, whether it's pro wrestling or mixed martial arts.
Yeah, well, that'd be a fun story right there alone. Might offend some
Absolutely.
people and upset some people, but
Well, what are you gonna do?
no. But if you give it the Hollywood treatment, especially because now you got me all excited as far as like the death matches. Well, the exploding C4 and the barbed wire and all that stuff. Um, Done in a Hollywood manner where it would give it the extravagance to it. And again, I always make the point to say the line based on a true story, because yeah, they'll take it as a framework, the historical actual events, but then they'll just build upon that one and build the drama, build the suspense, and then you get to this match, especially when the C4 goes off, or like in other death matches, the balloons hung above the ring with the thumbtacks that suddenly pop and they all come raining down, or the tank with the black scorpions or the piranhas. The absolute nonsense that they did just to entertain crowds. I, I don't remember the tape, but somebody had given me a VHS deathmatch tape, and once they were backstage, one of the Japanese team, one guy was literally with the press all around him, asking him questions and taking pictures. He was digging thumbtacks out of his partner's head, and you just saw the blood and the indentation that the thumbtack had left after he dug it out. I'm like, oh god. But they wanted to show you up close and personal, like, oh yeah, no, this is not orchestrated. We're out here, beating the crap out of each other. Or again, like the ones with the scorpions. You literally have to throw your opponent into a tank and then put a piece of plywood over the tank while your opponent is trying to jump out of the tank, and the scorpions are getting all pissed off and probably stinging them. don't get me
Yep.
wrong. I'm sure they probably gimmicked it in some shape or form, but still,
Yeah.
it's just the craziness that would happen, and then the death match stipulations just got bigger and bigger and bigger. The barbed wire, the electrified barbed wire, the C4, the light tubes, all that stuff. Just what I don't know when it
Yeah.
ends
And
because I've been to a few death matches in person, or weapons
Mhm.
matches I should say, and some of the implements that show up at some of these shows, like, people are sick. I think somebody had
Yeah.
brought like one of those baby dolls that little girls would have and they push around in their carts, covered
Yeah.
in nails. So they had pushed nails throughout the baby's skin, and they like wanted you to swing it by its feet and smack somebody with it. I'm like, oh my god! I loved it because whenever people would show up to the shows with these implements, then they would have to be told, okay, if you have something for the death match or for the weapons match, you have to hand it over prior to the event so that we can accommodate whatever under the ring or place it wherever it's going to be. But some of the weapons weren't even used. Like, somebody literally brought a katana. I'm like, yeah, that's not being used.
Yeah. Well,
the,
that's what I imagine they do too, is they're also like, okay, let's take a look at this stuff and see if this is actually like, reasonably safe, or if there's somebody really crazy that the fucking fans did. So, but no, and that's and it's interesting like that too, because the way I think of a lot of the stuff, especially related to death matches, is, and yes, there's always the chance of severe injury. I think it was a match between Necro Butcher and Madman Pondo from Christ, probably close to 20 years ago now, where just by random happenstance, at one point when Necro Butcher took a bump onto some of the light tubes,
mm,
one of them broke, and instead of just shattering, it kind of hit his arm like straight on, with like the broken end kind of going in and acting like a spear into his arm, so it penetrated very deep into his bicep.
I hate this story so much.
Well, and like the spookiest part about it is like, oh shit, like if he's like just took like a giant bump in the light tubes and he's holding his arms, like something's not right. And then like a minute or so later, Ian Rotten, the guy who ran IWA Mid South, you see him run into the ring, look at Necro Butcher, and then all of a sudden you just see him scream like, call an ambulance, and it's like, oh fuck.
Yeah,
But I mean, that's an extreme example, but for the most part, like out of these matches, the injuries that the guys get are superficial. They're going to be cut up, they're going to be bloodied. But if you, with proper wound care, most of these are going to be healed up within like a week or two.
absolutely. Yeah.
Um, the stuff that really creeps me out is one of the Kazuchika Okada versus Kenny Omega matches in New Japan from a few years ago. Watching Kazuchika Okada take a dragon suplex off the top turnbuckle, that's like uncomfortable to me, for me to watch, because all I can think is, yeah, the damage you're doing to your neck is
Yeah.
not going to be easily fixed. In fact, actually, I forgot who the commentator was, but after that spot, he even says something along the lines of, "I hope Okada thinks of this moment when he needs neck surgery."
Oh fuck.
And it's exactly correct. Like, that's the kind of bump that, like, I'd rather see 1,000 light tube hits than as compared to like seeing somebody take a bump like that with, especially a dragon suplex from the fucking top. I mean, fuck, bloody hell.
Whatever it takes to entertain the fans, man.
I mean, I can understand for like if you're at the top of the game and you're going all out, you're the main event of the New Japan, like one of the top show they always have in early January, which Wrestle Kingdom, which is effectively their WrestleMania. I understand you're gonna like basically like really really turn it up to 10 there, but goddamn, oof. I mean, how much is enough?
That's a great question. I don't think we're ever gonna really know the definitive answer to that one because let's see, by weapons, by hidden blades, getting somebody busted open the hard way, which is like punching towards their eyebrow in a downward motion. um, it's never good when it happens. Let's just put it that way, because if it's not done correctly, um, it could leave lasting marks. Look at Abdullah the Butcher, his forehead.
Oh yeah.
Look at Devon Dudley, his head. When you blade, even Ric Flair has like a little mass of scars that you see that are up around his head. Dusty Rhodes was another one.
Oh yeah.
They did it over and over and over again, and without, as you said, without proper wound care. Some of those things can be hidden because, all right. So for anybody who doesn't know, when you go to blade or juice, whatever the term that you're familiar with, whenever they're going to bleed for a match, normally what they'll do is they'll have a little hidden blade. So they'll break off a piece of a razor and hide it in the tape on their finger, or they'll have it somewhere hidden around the ring, whatever the case is. Sometimes even the referee might even have it, or it's given to them during a certain spot in the match. When they're going to blade, quote unquote, they'll take their finger or their hand and they put it up to grab like their head above the hairline. And they'll like normally they'll do like a quick cut. They'll just drag the razor across real fast, because if it's sharp enough, it's gonna do the job regardless. Or if they want it to prolong the bleeding, they'll jab the tip in real quick and then twist it so that they'll open up the wound. Now that one has a better chance of staying and scarring, because there's other people who they try to blade. I can't remember who it was. Well, like they bladed once, nothing came out, so they like bladed 3 or 4 more times. Like, oh, there it goes, and it starts bleeding all over the place. Those are little tricks, quote unquote, to wrestling. I think there was like a video I saw not too long ago. It might have been a Botchamania, where they show CM Punk trying to blade, and it's not working. But it's something to entertain the fans, because a guy like Ric Flair or Dusty Rhodes, blondes, when they come up off the floor or off the mat, and suddenly they just have the crimson mask. It's stained their hair, like their hair is now all red from the blood, and their face is just dripping. You're just like, oh my God, what the hell? Stuff like that. People just did it. And I remember being in the locker room a few times where people were like, how do I do this? Or how do I do that? And I would always hear the veteran saying, you just do this. If you want to hide it in your finger, you take a piece of tape up your finger normally, put the blade in there, tape it up again. And that way, when you're in the match, you can just peel the tape back, expose the blade, do it again. Now you can either ditch the blade, under the ring or something. You don't want a kid to get it, or you just, tape it back up where you're comfortable that it's not gonna affect the rest of the match. And I'm like, man, these guys this is like become a science. The one time I remember, again, I think it was the same show in South Jersey with Rikishi. Somebody was trying to figure out how to blade. They were trying to figure out how to blade, and someone's like, oh, we don't have any razor blades. Does anybody have a razor blade? And somebody goes, what's the nearest store to buy a razor blade? Now it became like a MacGyver session where we're like, okay, you can go buy a razor, but you have to break it out of the plastic. What about like regular razors from like a utility knife? No one's got one of those. What's in the ring truck? We don't have one. It just became like this silly discussion of like, how do you find a blade in like less than 10 minutes before the match starts? Like, oh, somebody's going to die. But it's stuff like that. And it's all to entertain the fans, because like you said, shows like Wrestle Kingdom, WrestleMania, I don't know what AEW's big show is off the top of my head. Is it Double or Nothing? Or All or Nothing?
I think it's All In.
All In, thank you. So when you get to those big, events for those shows, you want to push the envelope a little bit. You want to, get it out there. WWE, for the most part, has a no blood or no juicing policy. It has to be cleared first. But let's face it, things happen in the ring. And as I was playfully mentioning before, busting somebody open the hard way, there's the story between Terry Funk and Mick Foley. And no, excuse me, not Mick Foley. I think it was Tommy Dreamer and Mick Foley. And one of them wanted to get busted open the hard way. And they said, just punch in a downward motion on my, right above my eyebrow. It'll just split. It's like classic accident that happens in boxing matches. So they wanted to do it that way. And all of a sudden, the punch is thrown. Nothing happens. Punch is thrown again. Nothing happens. After like 3 or 4 more times, the one guy is getting punched in the head. He goes, can you please stop beating the fuck out of me?
Yep.
because he's not getting busted open. It's, the punches are landing. They're like you said, potatoes are being thrown, but the skin is not giving it up. So, yeah, whatever it takes to, tell the story, entertain the fans, they're willing to go out there and do that. And sometimes to the detriment of their long-term health, but fuck. I don't know. So long as you're entertained.
Some shit. Yeah.
So, well, this is a fun little trip down wrestling memory lane, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Was not expecting that one, but hey, it worked out. I do believe we've reached the end of the night, sir. How do you feel?
I'm exhausted.
All right. Well, if you've made it this far, thank you for listening. My name is Erich Hernandez, along with
Doug.
and we are the Rabblecast.